Imagine a world where every time someone tried to lie, their tongue turned bright purple. Not just any purple. Neon, glow in the dark, impossible to ignore purple. Politicians would give speeches looking like they'd been chewing on highlighters. Cheating spouses would get caught before they could even finish their first bad excuse. And children, well, let's just say the tooth fairy's business would collapse overnight. Welcome to What If Horizons, where we take impossible ideas and twist them until reality begs for mercy. Today's question: what if lying was physically impossible? At first, this sounds like a utopia. No more fake news. No more, "I swear I didn't eat your leftovers." No more, "Your haircut looks amazing," when it clearly does not. But dig a little deeper, and things get messy fast. Take politics, for example. Campaign promises would either disappear completely or become terrifyingly honest. Imagine a candidate standing on stage and saying, "I'm only running because I crave power, and also, I have no idea how to fix the economy." Would we respect the brutal honesty, or would democracy crumble under the weight of too much truth? Then there's dating. First dates would either become incredibly efficient or extinct. "You're nice, but I'm really just here for the free appetizers." No more pretending to laugh at bad jokes. No more, "I'll call you," when they absolutely will not. Romance would either thrive on raw honesty or collapse into a wasteland of awkward silences. And what about society's little white lies? The ones that keep things running smoothly. "No, your cooking isn't terrible, it's just experimental. Of course I remembered your birthday. I just wanted to surprise you with a late gift." Without those polite fictions, would we all descend into constant hurt feelings, or would we adapt to a world where honesty is the only currency? But here's the real kicker. If lying became impossible, would we even want to hear the truth? Or would we invent new ways to avoid it, like speaking in riddles, or communicating entirely through interpretive dance? Stick around, because this thought experiment is just getting started. And trust me, you'll know if I'm lying. My tongue would give it away. Now let's consider the legal system in a world without lies. Courtrooms would become the most efficient places on earth. Lawyers couldn't twist facts, witnesses couldn't exaggerate, and defendants couldn't spin elaborate alibis. Trials would last approximately 7 minutes, just long enough for everyone to say, "Yep, that's what happened," before the judge bangs the gavel. Prosecutors would have to get creative. Without the ability to bluff or dramatize, closing arguments would sound like reading a grocery list. The defendant committed the crime. Here's the evidence. Moving on. Defense attorneys, meanwhile, would have to resort to the only strategy left. "Okay, but have you considered that prison is kind of a bummer?" Jury selection would become hilariously straightforward. Instead of weeding out biased members, lawyers would just ask, "Can you be fair?" And everyone would have to answer truthfully. The biggest challenge: finding 12 people willing to admit they have nothing better to do than sit in a courtroom all day. Police interrogations would lose all their dramatic tension. Detectives couldn't pretend they had evidence they didn't, and suspects couldn't play dumb. Interrogation rooms would just feature 2 people nodding at each other until someone sighed and said, "Fine, I did it." The only remaining tactic: bribing suspects with better snacks than the other cops offered. And let's talk about contracts. No more fine print. No more hidden clauses. No more, "I swear I didn't see that page." Every agreement would have to be crystal clear from the start, written in language so plain even a sleep-deprived college student could understand it. The legal industry would shrink overnight, surviving only on the few lawyers willing to pivot to writing instruction manuals for furniture assembly. But here's the twist: crime itself might not disappear. Sure, stealing would be harder when you can't lie about it, but criminals would adapt. The smart ones would just switch to crimes that don't require deception, like very polite bank robberies where they hand the teller a note reading, "I am currently robbing you. Please remain calm." The real victims: crime dramas. Without interrogations, plot twists, or dramatic confessions, every episode would just be cops filling out paperwork in real time. Ratings would plummet, and TV networks would have to replace them with courtroom reality shows where the most exciting moment is someone admitting they forgot to renew their car registration. So while justice would certainly be faster in a lie-free world, we might miss the suspense. After all, there's something uniquely human about the dance between truth and deception, even if it does occasionally end with someone's neon purple tongue giving them away. Now let's examine how business and advertising would function in this painfully honest world. Marketing departments would implode overnight. No more limited time offers that never actually end. No more new and improved labels slapped on the exact same product. And absolutely no more "Your call is very important to us," while you've been on hold for 47 minutes listening to elevator music. Commercials would become bizarrely straightforward. Instead of dramatic voiceovers and aspirational lifestyles, ads would just feature a tired employee staring into the camera saying, "This toothpaste won't make you more attractive, but it will prevent cavities, and honestly, that's the best we can do." Supermarket aisles would be littered with packaging that reads, "Contains 10% less than the brand you actually wanted, but we were out of stock." Customer service would transform from a battle of wills into something resembling a therapy session. Representatives would greet callers with, "I've had a long day, you've probably had a long day, let's just get through this together." The phrase, "the computer system is down," would finally be believable because no one could fake technical difficulties anymore. And those satisfaction surveys at the end, they'd just say, "We already know exactly how you feel, but corporate makes us ask." The stock market would either become perfectly stable or descend into chaos. Without corporate spin or inflated projections, investors would have to make decisions based entirely on facts, a concept so radical it might crash the entire system. Earnings calls would be refreshingly brief. "We made money. Here's how much." No, "We don't know what happens next quarter." Restaurants would face particular challenges. Menus couldn't describe dishes as artisanal when they were clearly microwaved. Servers would have to answer, "How's the salmon?" with edible, but the chef's going through a divorce, so temper your expectations. And those health inspection ratings in the window, they'd all be accurate, meaning some establishments might as well just post a sign saying, "Eat here at your own risk." The job interview process would lose all its psychological warfare. Recruiters couldn't ask where you see yourself in 5 years because everyone would have to answer, "Hopefully not still doing this interview." Candidates couldn't claim to be detail-oriented, while their resume has 3 different fonts. The entire hiring process might collapse into one universal question: can you show up on time and not steal the office supplies? Perhaps most surprisingly, capitalism might actually become more ethical. Without the ability to mislead consumers or investors, businesses would have to compete on quality rather than deception. Or alternatively, the entire economy might shift to a barter system where people trade goods while making direct eye contact and admitting, "I have no idea what this is worth." One thing's certain: in a world without lies, the phrase, "buyer beware," would become obsolete. The new motto, "Buyer, you're about to get exactly what we told you, for better or worse." Let's dive into the world of education, where honesty becomes both a blessing and a curse. Teachers would no longer have to pretend every student is a unique snowflake destined for greatness. Report cards would read like brutally accurate fortune cookies. "Timmy has the math skills of a confused hamster, but he's great at doodling in the margins." Parent-teacher conferences would become refreshingly efficient. Instead of tiptoeing around issues, teachers could just say, "Your child is lovely, but they spend more time daydreaming than actually learning." Parents, unable to argue, would nod and reply, "Yeah, they get that from me." Exams would lose all their suspense. Students couldn't bluff their way through essay questions, and teachers couldn't sugarcoat failing grades. The most common exam response would be, "I have no idea what this question is asking, but here's my best guess." Teachers, in turn, would grade with equal honesty, "This is wrong, but I appreciate the effort." School assemblies would become unintentional comedy shows. Guest speakers couldn't claim to have all the answers, so they'd just stand on stage and say, "I'm here because the school paid me, and honestly, I'm just as confused about life as you are." The motivational part, admitting that confusion is perfectly normal. Homework would face a revolution. Students couldn't claim their dog ate it, so they'd have to resort to the truth. "I forgot, and also, I really didn't want to do it." Teachers, unable to punish honesty, might just respond with, "Fair enough. Let's both pretend this never happened." Extracurricular activities would become brutally transparent. Coaches couldn't promise scholarships to every player, so they'd just say, "You're probably not going pro, but hey, it's good exercise." Drama clubs would thrive on raw emotion, but musicals might suffer when everyone admits they're lip-syncing. Higher education would face its own challenges. College admissions essays would read like therapy sessions. I'm applying here because my parents said I have to, and also, I heard the parties are good. Professors couldn't claim their lectures are fascinating, so they'd just start class with, "This is required material. Let's get through it together." Graduation ceremonies would become oddly philosophical. Valedictorians couldn't pretend they have life figured out, so their speeches would consist of, "We're all just winging it, and that's okay." Diplomas would come with a disclaimer. "This proves you survived, not that you're ready for the real world." Perhaps the biggest change, education might finally focus on genuine learning rather than performance. Without the pressure to fake understanding, students could embrace curiosity, and teachers could admit they don't have all the answers. Of course, this honesty comes with a cost. The phrase, "you can be anything you want," would disappear, replaced by, "you can be good at some things, and that's enough." It's a less glamorous message, but maybe a more realistic one. So while schools might lose their polish in a lie-free world, they could gain something far more valuable: authenticity. And let's be honest, isn't that what education should be about? Now let's explore how relationships would function in a world where lying is physically impossible. Dating apps would become brutally efficient. Profiles would no longer feature carefully curated photos and witty bios. Instead, they'd just say, "I'm here because I'm lonely, and also, I'm terrible at small talk." Matches would be based on shared honesty rather than shared interests. "You're awkward. Me too. Let's be awkward together." First dates would lose all their pretense. No more pretending to love hiking or obscure foreign films. Conversations would start with, "So, what's your deal? And please don't say you're just figuring things out." The most common first date question: "How long do we have to stay here before it's socially acceptable to leave?" Marriage proposals would become refreshingly straightforward. No more elaborate setups or hidden ring boxes. Proposals would just be, "I like you enough to tolerate you forever. Wanna make it official?" The response would be equally honest. "Sure, but let's keep the receipts for the wedding gifts." Anniversaries would lose their pressure. Instead of pretending to remember the exact date, couples would just say, "I think it's around this time of year. Let's celebrate whenever we feel like it." Gifts would be practical rather than romantic. "I got you a new vacuum because ours broke, and also, I didn't want to think too hard about this." Breakups would become oddly civil. Instead of vague excuses, people would just say, "This isn't working, and I think we both know why." The response: "Yeah, fair. Wanna split the Netflix account or nah?" Friendships would thrive on raw honesty. No more pretending to like someone's terrible cooking or questionable fashion choices. Compliments would be rare but meaningful. "I don't say this often, but your haircut actually looks good today." Family gatherings would become both easier and harder. No more pretending to enjoy Aunt Carol's dry turkey or Uncle Bob's endless stories about his lawn. Conversations would start with, "Let's just get through this meal without arguing, okay?" The most common family phrase: "We're stuck with each other, so let's make the best of it." Parenting would face its own challenges. Parents couldn't pretend to have all the answers, so they'd just say, "I'm figuring this out as I go, just like you." Kids, unable to lie, would respond with, "That's not helpful, but I guess it's honest." The phrase, "white lie," would disappear from the dictionary. Instead, people would embrace the concept of kind honesty. "That outfit doesn't suit you, but you're still a great person." While relationships might lose some of their polish in a lie-free world, they could gain something far more valuable: authenticity. After all, isn't that what true connection is all about? So while we might miss the occasional sugarcoating, we'd gain relationships built on trust and transparency. And let's be honest, isn't that worth a little awkwardness? Now let's examine how entertainment and media would transform in this ruthlessly honest world. Hollywood would experience a full-scale meltdown. Red carpet interviews would lose all their glamour as actors admit, "I'm only here because my contract requires it, and, honestly, I hated making this movie." Award speeches would clock in at 5 seconds flat. "Thanks to everyone who made this possible, especially my agent for forcing me to take this role." Reality TV would either become fascinating documentaries or cease to exist altogether. Contestants couldn't pretend to like each other for the cameras, leading to shows where people just state their grievances openly. "I'm voting you off because you chew too loudly." The dramatic confessionals would just be people sighing, "I'm so tired of this," while staring blankly at production crews. News broadcasts would become startlingly concise. Anchors would open with, "Here's what actually matters today," followed by 90 seconds of important information before signing off with, "The rest is just filler to meet our time slot." Weather reporters would abandon predictions entirely, switching to, "It might rain, or it might not, check your window." Streaming algorithms would collapse under the weight of honesty. Instead of, "Because you watched this," suggestions, platforms would display, "We paid a lot for this terrible show, please watch it so we can break even." User reviews would become painfully accurate. "This is mediocre but I finished it because I was too lazy to find something better." Movie trailers would lose all their deception. Instead of dramatic orchestral swells, they'd feature disclaimers like, "The funniest parts are all in this trailer," and, "The third act makes no sense but the studio made us keep it." Film posters would simply state, "It's fine for a Tuesday night when you're too tired to care." The music industry would face radical transparency. Concerts would come with warnings, "We're lip-syncing tonight because the tour schedule destroyed our voices." Album promotions would admit, "There's maybe 2 good songs on here, the rest is contractual obligation." Songs about love and heartbreak would become suspiciously specific, no longer portraying fictionalized romance but actual therapy sessions set to melody. Book publishing would undergo similar changes. Cover blurbs would say, "This is the author's best work since their actual decent book from 2012. Autobiographies couldn't embellish facts, resulting in titles like, "Things That Mostly Happened Probably." Self-help sections would shrink to a single volume titled, "Nobody Really Knows What They're Doing." Stand-up comedy would either become incredibly refreshing or completely disappear. Comedians couldn't pretend their material was original, leading to sets that begin with, "I stole this joke from Twitter, but here's my version." Crowd work would become conversations where both parties admit, "We're only doing this to avoid awkward silence." In this brutally honest media landscape, the true winners might be the consumers, no longer sold fantasies but given clear expectations. Of course, we'd lose the comforting illusions that make entertainment entertaining. But perhaps we'd gain something better, media we can actually trust. The only remaining mystery, why we ever tolerated anything less. Let's turn our attention to how international relations would function in a world where diplomacy can't rely on strategic deception. The United Nations would become the most efficient organization overnight, with ambassadors cutting through the usual political theater to say exactly what their governments actually think. Security Council meetings would last 15 minutes instead of 15 hours, concluding with, "We all know nothing will change, so let's just adjourn for lunch." Treaty negotiations would lose their carefully crafted ambiguity. Instead of months of delicate phrasing, agreements would read like straightforward contracts. Country A won't invade Country B as long as Country B stops doing that annoying thing with the trade tariffs. The concept of diplomatic language would disappear entirely, replaced by, "Here's exactly what we want, take it or leave it." Summits between world leaders would become shockingly productive. No more smiling photo ops hiding tense disagreements. Every handshake would come with an honest assessment. "Your economic policies are hurting my country, but I need your support on climate change, so let's pretend to like each other for the cameras." Press conferences would feature journalists asking real questions and politicians giving actual answers, a development so radical it might cause several news anchors to faint live on air. Intelligence agencies would have to completely reinvent themselves. Spies couldn't maintain false identities, so operations would rely on technical skills rather than deception. The CIA might rebrand as the "really good at satellite photos agency." Whistleblowers would become obsolete since every document would already contain nothing but the unvarnished truth. Military strategy would undergo a paradigm shift. Generals couldn't use misinformation or feints, turning warfare into a strangely transparent affair. Battle plans might literally be exchanged beforehand like chess moves. "We're attacking the north border at dawn. Feel free to prepare your defenses." While this might reduce casualties, it would also eliminate any possibility of surprise victories. Foreign aid would become refreshingly straightforward. Instead of political strings attached, donor countries would say, "We're giving you this money because we want influence in your region." Recipient nations would respond, "We're taking it because we're desperate, not because we like you." This mutual honesty might actually improve international cooperation, or it might lead to everyone admitting they'd rather just keep their resources to themselves. The tourism industry would experience unexpected consequences. Travel advisories would become painfully accurate. This destination has great beaches but terrible food poisoning risks. Brochures would feature unretouched photos with captions like, "This looks better in the pictures," and "The historical significance is the only reason to visit." Immigration policies would become transparently self-interested. Border officials would say, "We need skilled workers but don't actually want to deal with cultural integration." Applicants would reply, "I just want a better paycheck, I'll pretend to care about your national values." This mutual understanding might reduce tensions, or it might reveal how little either side actually wants to compromise. In this new global order, the concept of ally would take on a much more literal meaning. Countries would form partnerships based on clear mutual benefit rather than vague promises. While this might make international relations less dramatic, it could also make them more stable. After all, when everyone's cards are on the table, bluffing becomes impossible, and perhaps that's exactly what world peace needs. Now let's consider how technology and innovation would evolve in a world where lying is impossible. Tech companies would have to abandon their habit of overpromising and under-delivering. Product launches would become refreshingly honest affairs. Our new phone has a slightly better camera and a battery that still won't last all day. Pre-order now before we discontinue it next year. Software updates would come with accurate patch notes instead of vague improvements. This update fixes 3 bugs but introduces 2 new ones. We're working on it, but no promises. App developers couldn't claim their games are addictive or life-changing, so they'd just say, "This will kill time while you wait in line." That's about it. Social media platforms would face an existential crisis. Without the ability to curate perfect lives, users would post raw, unfiltered content. "Here's my breakfast. It's burnt because I'm bad at cooking." Influencers would lose their appeal overnight, replaced by people who admit, "I'm not an expert, but here's my opinion anyway." The most popular posts, "I'm having a bad day, and I just wanted someone to know." Tech support would become oddly therapeutic. Instead of reading from scripts, representatives would say, "I don't know why it's not working either, but let's try turning it off and on again." Customers, unable to fake politeness, would respond, "I'm frustrated, but I know it's not your fault. Let's figure this out together." Artificial intelligence would face a reckoning. Developers couldn't claim their AI is revolutionary, when it's really just a fancy algorithm. Instead, they'd say, "This might help with some tasks, but it's not going to solve all your problems. Please manage your expectations." Tech conferences would lose their hype. Keynote speeches would feature executives admitting, "We're just iterating on last year's model, but we needed something to announce." Audience questions would be brutally honest. "Why should we care about this product when it's basically the same as everything else?" Startups would struggle to attract investors without the ability to inflate their potential. Pitch decks would read, "We have a decent idea and a small chance of success. Want to take a gamble?" Venture capitalists, unable to pretend they understand every industry, would respond, "I'll fund you because I'm bored, not because I believe in your vision." Consumer electronics would come with realistic warranties. "This device will last about 2 years before it becomes obsolete. Plan accordingly." Packaging would feature honest warnings. "Requires patience, a steady internet connection, and the ability to ignore constant update notifications." Perhaps the biggest change, technology might finally become user-friendly. Without the pressure to overhype features, companies would focus on making products that actually work. The phrase, "intuitive design," would mean something again, and users wouldn't need to lie to themselves about enjoying the experience. So while the tech industry might lose some of its glamour in a lie-free world, it could gain something far more valuable: trust. And let's be honest, isn't that what innovation should be about? Let's examine the healthcare system in a world where medical professionals can't sugarcoat the truth. Doctors' visits would become startlingly efficient. No more pretending you exercise 3 times a week when asked. Your physician would take one look at you and say, "Let's skip the part where you lie about your diet and get straight to your actual symptoms." Prescriptions would come with brutally honest labels. Instead of, "Take with food," medication would say, "This will probably upset your stomach but it's better than the alternative." Antibiotics would be marked, Only use when absolutely necessary because we're running out of effective ones. Hospitals would display accurate wait times in their ERs. You'll be seen in approximately 4 hours unless someone more seriously injured arrives, which they definitely will. Triage nurses wouldn't ask how much pain you're in on a scale of 1 to 10. They'd just look at you and say, "You're clearly at a 6, sit down and try not to faint." Medical billing would transform completely. Statements would plainly state, "We're charging you $800 for this bandage because the healthcare system is broken, not because it's actually worth that much." Insurance companies would have to admit, "We denied your claim because we'd rather keep our profits high than help you." Dentists would lose their subtle approach. Instead of saying, "You might feel some pressure," they'd warn, "This is going to hurt but not as much as an untreated abscess would." Cleanings would come with honest assessments like, "Your gums are angry because you only floss when you have something stuck in your teeth." Mental health professionals would operate differently too. Therapists couldn't pretend to remember all your details between sessions. "Remind me where we left off last time. I see dozens of patients and they all blur together after a while," they'd say. Progress would be measured honestly. "We're making slow improvement, which is better than no improvement." Plastic surgeons would have to abandon their sales pitches. Instead of promising miracles, consultations would sound like, "I can make you look slightly different, not necessarily better, and there will be scarring." Botox providers would admit, "This will freeze your face for a few months so you can pretend you're not aging." Pharmacists would become more direct with their advice. "This medicine technically could interact with your other prescriptions, but the chance is small and we're all gambling with our health anyway," they might say while ringing up your order. Or simply, "Don't take this with alcohol unless you enjoy blacking out." Healthcare advertising would lose all its glamour. Drug commercials would state, "This might help your condition but also cause these other terrible side effects." Gym memberships would be sold with the disclaimer, "Most people who sign up never come after the first month, but maybe you'll be different." Perhaps the most profound change would be in end-of-life care. Doctors wouldn't dance around difficult prognosis. "You have about 6 months with treatment, maybe 8 if you're lucky," they'd say, allowing patients to make truly informed decisions about their care. The entire medical industry would be forced to shift from profit-driven to patient-focused when deception is off the table. And while the honesty might be jarring at first, it could lead to better outcomes when patients and providers actually trust each other. After all, when lives are at stake, isn't radical transparency exactly what we should want from our healthcare system? Even if it means hearing some uncomfortable truths about our lifestyle choices along the way. As we wrap up this thought experiment, it's clear that a world without lying would be both simpler and more complicated. Relationships, businesses, governments, and even our daily interactions would undergo profound changes. Some of these changes would be liberating. No more pretending, no more hiding, no more guessing. Others would be uncomfortable, forcing us to confront truths we'd rather avoid. But perhaps the most important takeaway is this: honesty, while sometimes painful, has the power to build trust, foster genuine connections, and create a more transparent society. Imagine a world where every word spoken is true, where every promise is kept, and where every decision is made with clarity rather than deception. It's a world that challenges us to be better, to do better, and to expect better from one another. Of course, we're not there yet. Lies, big and small, still shape our lives in ways we might not even realize. But this exercise invites us to reflect on the role honesty plays in our own lives. What would change if we stopped lying, to others and to ourselves? What would we gain? What would we lose? And most importantly, is it a world we'd want to live in? Thanks for joining us on this journey through the what-ifs of a lie-free world. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to What If Horizons for more thought-provoking explorations of the impossible. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What's one lie you wish you could stop telling? Let's keep the conversation honest. Until next time, stay curious.